Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. We're reading Iqbal's Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, and we had stopped here last time. The larger whole is, to use the Quranic metaphor, the kind of preserved tablet that is the Lawhul Mahfuz. And this larger whole he's talking about is this thought he was talking about before. Thought is therefore the whole in its dynamic self-expression. And this thought, the way Iqbal is defining it or describing it, resembles very much with Hegel's idea of absolute, or his idea of infinite, or his idea of Geist, or his idea of God. So thought, as Iqbal defines it, is not calling it God, but it resembles very much what Hegel calls God. But Iqbal is saying that this thought is the whole in the Hegelian sense. And the whole mean all that there is in this context. At one point he likens it to a seed. So it is the potentially all that there is. And he also says that potentiality, he doesn't say it, but if we get cues from Hegel, that thought is abstraction in the sense that its reality is basically how it manifests itself. So manifestations are its realities. So when we talk about potential, it's an abstraction in that sense. So thought is the whole. But obviously there can be whole within, there can be the whole within the whole. There can be a whole within the whole, this whole. And generally the Hegel's bias is the larger the whole, the greater its reality in some sense, because the only real reality is the whole, all that there is. And this thought as a potential contains everything in it, because it is all that there is. So there's a nature within it, being within it, thought within it. And then it manifests itself. So thought is therefore the whole in its dynamic self-expression. So its reality lies in its self-expression, its manifestation. So this thought, this whole, manifests itself, expresses itself, and this expression, these particular expression cannot be really understood without reference to the whole, the potential, the whole reality. So in a sense that this thought is actually realizing itself or expressing itself or actualizing itself through time. And once it has fully actualized itself, then I guess the time will stop, or the history will stop. And Iqbal here is bringing in the larger whole is to use the Quran. So likening Quranic concept of Lawhul Mahfuz to this thought. So he is not comparing it with this thought to Quranic concept of God, but rather to Lawh Mahfuz, because the way he is describing Lawh Mahfuz is the carbon copy of how he defined thought, which was a carbon copy of how Hegel defines thought and his absolute and his conception of God, as we will see. Because Hegel said the larger whole, to use the Quranic metaphor, is a kind of preserved tablet, which holds up the entire undetermined possibilities of knowledge. So here he's just talking about knowledge, not being, but this knowledge is related to the present reality, because these possibilities reveal themselves in serial time, a succession of concepts pairing to reach a unity which is already present. So probably this preserved tablet is infinite for him as well, but if it is infinite, then that means that it is all there is, which is not true. That would be akin to saying that Lawh Mahfuz is God, or all that there is God in the Hegelian sense. But we'll see how it goes as we move on in our reading of Iqbal. But it's at this point what I want to do, and I had started doing this in the last session, is to go through quickly Hegel's conception of God and then compare it with the Islamic concept of Lawh Mahfuz as Iqbal is presenting it, and we'll look at some other views on that as well, and then we'll decide how Iqbal's concept of thought stands in relation with Hegel's concept of God. Okay, so let's go. As we saw yesterday, God for Hegel is the true subject matter of philosophy. As philosophy is theology in Aristotelian sense. The study of God. That's why when Thomas Aquinas and other Christians try to differentiate their theology, Christian theology, from this Aristotelian sense of theology, they call it dogmatic theology. And in this, as we saw, Hegel is quite close to one of his masters, Aristotle. And we should not forget his other master, who is Spinoza. As we say, we'll see his conception of God is very close to the Jewish philosopher Spinoza. Jewish in the sense, in the racial sense, ethnic sense. And also, there's, as far as I'm concerned, there's no contradiction that Hegel is also a great Lutheran philosopher. He's a great follower of Luther as well, even though Luther hated Aristotle. So I think the Aristotle he hated was the Catholic version of Aristotle, the only Aristotle he knew, I guess. So these things are important. And we also saw that for Hegel, God and God alone is the truth. And this is obviously very close to what we, in fact, one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, the glorious Quran, is Al-Haq. He is the truth. But the main thing is here, what is his conception of God? And that's why I said it's very important. It doesn't matter a person believe in God or not, in a sense. The main thing is, what is your conception of God? So now we are going to look at Hegel's conception of God. Obviously, some very briefly, just as far as we needed to understand Paul at this point, because Hegel, like any philosopher, is very complex, and you shouldn't think that what I'm saying here is the sum total of what Hegel is. For that, you would have to read Hegel. Hopefully, you'll read at some point, but not right now. So I'm just going to look at Hegel's conception of God, or the main points, which interest me in his conception of God. Obviously, we have been talking about Hegel in this reading, because of the fact that the first chapter of the Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, which we are reading, is heavily Hegelian. So we had no choice but bring in Hegel again and again. So we know quite a bit about Hegel at this point. So one thing we know about Hegel is, for him, infinite is the whole, in the sense that infinite is all that there is. So infinity doesn't consist in unending sequence or anything like that. So this is a different conception of infinity. And according to this conception, finite things is part and parcel of this infinite. So finite is within, or a moment within the infinite. Because Hegel argued that if finite is outside infinite, then finite is in a sense limiting infinite. And if finite is limiting infinite, then infinite is no infinite. So that will lead to a contradiction. That's why he abandoned the idea that finite is separate from infinite. So finites are moments within infinite. And that's a crucial point in understanding Hegel's philosophy and also his conception of God. Because if God is infinite, according to Hegel, and he is, or it is, I don't think he has, don't know whether he has a personal conception of God, then as finite beings, we are part and parcel of God, a moment within God. So we are not God, but we are a moment within God. We are not God because we are finite. But we are not separate from infinite. So if we look at, if we just stay on this point, so we can draw an important conclusion from this conception, whatever else he might say about God, for him, for Hegel, God is not God is not separate from the world, from the nature, from individual consciousness. Um, God is not separate from the world. So, in a sense, we can say individual consciousness, nature, the world are moments within the life of God. Now, this is a rejection of a transcendent God. It's a rejection of creation, the concept of creation. And obviously, Hegel is very Greek in that Aristotle doesn't have any conception of creation either. And it's also the rejection of the total separation between God and his creation, which is the key to all 3 points are key to Abrahamic conception of God. So his conception of God is not transcendent, and probably he's not a pantheist either, because it's hard to say, but pantheist, because pantheism if that God has penetrated the world in a sense, or reflected himself in his creation. That's why, for example, Christian can say that God, Christ is a God and also man, and still believe that God is transcendent. So pantheism, even though pantheism might say that, obviously it depends on the type of pantheism, might say that God has permeated, is it permeated? Yeah, in the world, but God is still separate from the world. In that sense, Hegel reject both transcendentalism or transcendism of God, or transcendence of God to be, and also probably pantheism, in at least in its more popular sense. But if we define pantheism as my dictionary does here, pantheism as a doctrine which identifies God with the universe. Universe, if we by universe mean the whole, the all that there is, or regards the universe as a manifestation, regards universe as the manifestation of God. Then probably you can say that Hegel is a uh, Hegel is a pantheist. But main thing to remember is he rejects transcendence of God. He rejects separation, creator and his creator. He rejects transcendence of God, rejects separation, and rejects the concept of creation. God, for Hegel, on the other hand, is infinite in his sense. Infinite finites are moments within God. But God, infinite is all that there is. It is already there. Although it is there as a potential. And that's the conception which I guess separates Hegel from his other master Spinoza, because Spinoza probably would agree with these, but he might reject this, that God is a potential. And that's why Hegel's concept, potential, which is realizing itself in history, Spinoza's concept. So in that sense, Hegel's conception of God is very dynamic. Dynamic in the sense that God is not complete yet; He is completing itself in a sense. On the other hand, Spinoza's concept of God is static. God is perfect, and it is the most beautiful, and it is all already complete in that sense. And that leads us to this second point, that God for Hegel is a potential realizing itself. Now it will depend on how we read him, realizing itself or manifesting itself or actualizing itself. In history or in time. So finite moments in the world, including humans and human consciousness, are, and human societies and human civilization and human and the nature itself and its different modes, are God's attempt to manifest itself or realize itself or actualize itself. And God will be totally complete. In that sense, God is incomplete. Complete as actuality, as potentially is already complete, but as actuality, that will be the end of the history, end of the motion or movement. So movement is there because God is actually completing itself. So that movement makes his conception of God dynamic as compared to Spinoza, for example. And also in a sense it is akin to Aristotle as well, because in Aristotle God is the source of all movement, but it is different from Aristotle's conception of God again, because in the sense that Aristotle's concept is static, because like Spinoza, Aristotle, God is already complete and motion is actually a lack. But despite his disagreement with Spinoza and Aristotle, Hegel does, as we have said before, keep his Aristotelian bias against motion. So motion is a lack in a sense as well, because once God is there is motion only because God is incomplete. Once God is complete, then the motion will stop. That will be the end of history. The end of history. Yeah. So I think probably we should stop here. Probably we need to say a bit more about Hegel's conception of God. So we'll do that in the next session, and then we'll compare his conception of God with Iqbal's idea of thought, and especially his reinterpretation of Lawh Mahfuz, or the preserved tablet. Thank you.